Hi, my name is Savannah, and I'm one half of the team that's doing Describing Archives a Content Standard, or DACS. And I'll talk about what DACS is, how it's implemented, and the history. So what's the purpose of the standard? Well, Describing Archives a Content Standard, or DACS, is an output-neutral set of rules for describing archives, personal papers, and manuscript collections, and can be applied to all material types. It is the U.S. implementation of international standards and for the description of archival materials and their creators. The first edition of DACS was officially adopted as a standard by the Council of the Society of American Archivists in March 2004, following a review by the SAA Standards Committee, its Technical Subcommittee for Describing Archives, a Content Standard, and the general archival community. In 2013, the second edition of DACS was created, and shortly later, in 2015, they revised this edition. But in 2016, they created a GitHub to track the changes to DACS, which I will be showing on the next couple slides. Now, there were a few minor changes since then, but now in 2024, DACS is used by most, if not all, archives, museums, and libraries in the United States. And this is from their official website, which I've linked at the end of the slides. Just gives kind of an overview, the same thing I've just said, but like in a very matter-of-fact way of saying it. Basically, that DACS facilitates consists appropriate and self-explanatory description of archival materials and creators of archival materials. They just talk about how it works with Mark 21 encoded archival description EAD and encoded archival context. And DACS consists of two parts. Part 1, which is describing archival materials, and Part 2, archival authority records. It includes rules for formatting dates, such as always putting the year first, except for when there's estimated dates. It also includes rules for recording multiple types of dates, inclusive dates, and predominant dates. Like I said, DACS uses GitHub, which they created in 2016 to house all the changes it does according to the SAA Council, which is their standards committee. On GitHub, they have this handy chart, which I've broken up into two so you can read it. This shows the process by which DACS can be changed, and they break up this into 6 groups of responsibilities. You have TCS DACS, which is the original team, the community, which is the archivists and museum people, just those who use DACS but aren't on the actual team. Then you have the standards, which are all the standards they use for DACS. The council, which is the SAA council I mentioned before. Publications is the publication team that they publish the DACS when it changes, and the SAA web team that creates the HTML and generates the website. So if you look at our flowchart, it starts with either the community or TCS DACS creating a proposal. Then if revision is needed, it's sent to the GitHub request. Then they get feedback from the community. If this is all supported, if it is supported, it is submitted to the SAA Standards Committee, which will look into this, and if they approve it, they send it to the council, which they approve, will be sent for a new printing for the web team to add to GitHub. And once they do all that, it looks like this. This is their GitHub page, which I have also linked back on the GitHub page. And how it works is that people who use the system can go into these different folders and look up the different standards, whether it be, like it said, dates or authors, and any kind of how to describe that, and even how to describe the appendixes. Now, this isn't to say that the standard's perfect, and my teammate will help explain differences and stuff like that, and I'll let her take it away.
So, I am going to talk a little bit with you about the current issues and events, blind spots and weaknesses, and describing archives. I am also going to present to you two questions for the future when we discuss describing archives. So up first, we're going to talk about potentially harmful content being one of the biggest issues in DACS, or describing archives, a content standard. I'm sorry, this is my first time using this. Let's see. Hope you're able to see my screen. But one of the biggest issues with describing archives will be potentially harmful content. due to the nature of archives and preserving their historical significance. It is extremely important to keep archive materials as close to originality as possible. So, when describing archives, there's the possibility of an archivist using words and language that one can find offensive, be harmful, and difficult to view. Some of the materials presented here may reflect outdated, biased, offensive, and possibly violent views and opinions. Additionally, some of the materials may relate to violent or graphic events and are preserved for their historical significance. So, how are archivists working to address the problem and help users better understand such content? They are informing users about the presence and origin of harmful content, revising descriptions and standardized sets of descriptive terms, supplementing description with more respectful terms, or creating new standardized items to describe materials. Researching the problem, listening to users, experimenting with solutions, and sharing our findings with each other, evaluating existing process for exclusionary practices or institutional bias that prioritize one culture or group over another. And lastly, making an institutional commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So, does DACS need change? I don't see significant changes being a requirement when discussing the content standard of describing archives. However, there is a site, GitHub, that facilitates an open and transparent revision process of DACS and to document a record of all changes made to that standard. So, pretty much right now, I don't see anything that needs changing, but when things are changed, they do have pretty much like an open door policy and they are open to suggestions. Um, that site also includes full text of the standard and a record of all proposed and accepted revisions that dates back all the way to March of 2016. The first edition of DACS was officially adopted as a standard by the Council of the Society of American Archivists in March of 2004, following review by the Society of American Archivist Standards Committee, its technical subcommittee for describing archives, a content standard in the general archival community. So, weakness and blind spots. DAX is implementation neutral and can be expressed in any data format. However, the weakness and blind spot is whereas DAX primarily serves the US audience, stakeholders of many encoding standards represent an international community rooted in sometimes diverging descriptive practices. This has necessitated encoding implementations that err on the side of permissiveness, and practitioners may opt to strengthen the alignment between the respective coding standard of their choice and DAX by producing a narrower implementation of the chosen encoding standard at the local level. So, social, cultural, and political issues practitioners should be aware of. Politically, looking at politics, I think it's very important to know that practitioners should understand that law lasts behind archival ethics. There are no laws governing the disposition, preservation, or accessibility of papers of Supreme Court justices and other federal judges. Um, so it makes it very hard for accessible evidence of diverse and complex elements of human experience in preserving historical documentation for the judicial system. Socially, I think an issue will always be holding each other accountable and being transparent with information seekers. And culturally, we're going to talk about net neutrality, which is, enables archives and archive workers to provide researchers with equitable and unfettered access. So for that, just archivists share a commitment to provide an open and equitable access to records entrusted in their care. So, questions for the future. With technology steadily advancing and evolving, how will technology affect describing archival collections and preservation in the future? The second question, describing archives, a content standard provides a set of principles for archivists to consider when conducting the work of a descriptive program and a set of elements and rules for creating these elements for archivists to use when creating archival description. Although unethical, do you think an archivist can put personal principles and biases ahead of DACS principles when creating archival descriptions? Why or why not?